We would request that all of the guests please mute their mics. There will be time for questions at the end, and we would like to let you know that you are being recorded. So we do appreciate all of you for coming here today. We would like to highlight our amazing ASL interpreters today, Ms. Shantae Fraser, and I believe Susan Lauren. And we also have our Spanish interpreters here today as well. So we really want to thank all of you and our esteemed panelists, hearing examiner Tamara Shahadi Cope, Dr. Marati Fernandez from Chicago, and our civic and local on-the-ground civil roots activist, Nancy Mijan, who shall be joining us in a minute. So please, if our esteemed panelists would be, willing to say hi and just introduce themselves before we get started, we would really appreciate that.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I see a lot of familiar faces here. Wonderful to be with you all today. My name is Tamara Shahadi Cope. I'm one of 2 hearing examiners here at the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, and I am based in the Harrisburg region. Prior to joining the commission, I was an immigration attorney for many years. I worked with detained individuals at the York County Prison in ICE detention, as well as later at the Moshannon County Correctional Facility that is currently housing ICE detainees. We provided Know Your Rights classes and legal representation in asylum cases. And I also have been fortunate enough to work with survivors of domestic violence, human trafficking, and related crimes in their petitions for immigration relief before the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. And just really honored to be here with you all today and to continue doing the good work. And, this time doing this very important civil rights anti-discrimination work.
Thank you very much. Dr. Fernandez, would you be willing to say a few words before we get started here?
Definitely. Can you see me?
I cannot see you. I don't know if your camera is on.
My camera is on, but I don't know where I'm at in all of this group right now.
Let me see. I see you on my screen, but I, for some reason, do not see you on here. There we go. Please go ahead.
Thank you for inviting me to this important panel. My name is Merari Fernandez Castro. I'm a psychotherapist. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Illinois and in Puerto Rico. I've been working with the immigrant population since my first job when I arrived in Chicago. I work with domestic violence survivors. I work with them in drafting and helping them get VAWA petitions, which are petitions for survivors who have been abused by their spouses, and EU visas as well for survivors of victims of a crime. In general, my work has been with people of color, the Latinx community, around issues of trauma, domestic violence, sexual assault. Also, some of my research is devoted to discuss the issues of discrimination and racism for psychotherapists in the field who are immigrants and who are people of color, which I will be happy to talk about in our conversation today. So thank you for having me here.
And I believe our last panelist, Ms. Nancy Mijan, has officially joined us. Would you be able to say a few words and just kind of briefly introduce yourself for us before we begin our questions for today?
Hi, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. My name is Nancy Mijan. I live in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and I've been working as a civic member of the community with an organization called CASA. I've been volunteering for them, and I've been exposed to all the topics in the theme that we have today. So I have experienced that migrant oh my God, experience. Sorry for the redundancy.
Well, thank you so much. And one final thank you before we begin is my colleague OC Enriquez was a pivotal role in making today possible. So I just wanted to thank him and just have him say hello before we start.
Buenos días a todos. My name is Omar Enriquez. I've been in the field of the therapeutic mental health and drug and alcohol for the last 20 years. I've been with the PHRC for the last couple months, but I've been working as a state employee for the last 5 years. Thank you, thank you, OC Torres, for the acknowledgement. But I'll defer to the experts today, and I'll let them speak on behalf of the panel. Thank you.
All righty. So our first question here today is how has immigration impacted the diversity of professionals and clients within your field, and what challenges or benefits have arisen from this increased diversity? Doctora Fernandez, would you be willing to speak on this first?
Well, definitely. I'm a social worker, first of all, and also a psychotherapist. So I can talk from both perspectives about from being a social worker and from being a psychotherapist. But I have to say, first of all, that the field of social work has always strived to adhere to values of diversity. And this began since the beginning of the inception or the foundation of the profession, in which when we are trained with the mindset of like we are going to work with minorities and disadvantaged groups in society. And as a result of the waves of immigration through history, immigrants have been one of the populations served in the social work profession, either we as advocates, case managers, case coordinators, providing group and individual psychotherapy. So I just wanted to bring that up, at the forefront before talking about the challenges and everything else that's going on. And so, but also I had to say that there's some invisibility in terms of the work that we do for immigrants, because we are occupying these positions, but we are not called social workers. We're called case coordinators, case managers, psychotherapists, and we're hired in the Child Protection Services, Immigration and Refugee Service organizations, domestic violence and sexual assault agencies. So the social work emphasized the importance of examining power struggles and differences between a group of people, between the marginalized populations and people in power. However, having said all of that, interestingly, the field of social work and the psychotherapy field in the US is predominantly white. So when I say white, I mean like Anglo people, like established in the US, with families, living in the US for a long time. So one of the challenges with this scenario is that many immigrant families are served by white clinicians who some might have a very well-intended, ways of dealing with cases, but some of them will replicate what we call white ideology or the white lens in the cases they're managed, such as not understanding cultural and language barriers dynamics, placing children who are removed from their homes, where there is a huge cultural difference from that of the child, or expecting immigrant clients speak English or express themselves as native English speakers when seeking services at social service organizations. Although we are seeing the field of social work getting diverse more over time by social workers who are immigrants themselves, or they're children of immigrants who are going to school, that's something that's been changing. And in terms of the psychotherapy field, we had to think about the psychotherapy field as compounded or made of different people with different kinds of educations, like psychologists, counselors, social workers. So in terms of the psychotherapy field, we're seeing more emphasis on how we as psychotherapists, when we are trained, we need to think about how we position ourselves in relation to the clients that we serve. So there's a lot of more training about that, which is good, right? Because I think a lot of therapists need to think and become more sensitive about, especially if they're going to work with immigrants. But one of the challenges in the psychotherapy field is to be able in training. For example, if I'm an immigrant psychotherapist, I need to go to a training and I need to read material that speaks to my experience as an immigrant psychotherapist and as the clients that I'm serving. And sometimes that's not the case. So that's one of the challenges that immigrant psychotherapists face. Also, there are some experiences that immigrant psychotherapists might face in terms of language and cultural barriers, as well as how to manage clients' biases in session. For example, immigrant psychotherapists might have a white client who might question their immigration status or might ask, where do you go to school? That kind of thing sometimes are not, like, psychotherapists who are immigrants are not trained to manage these kind of situations in sessions that can be very threatening. And I'm saying this because it happened to me, which led me to work on a research talking about the experience of immigrant psychotherapists of color. But that's with this question, this is I can share. I can talk more about the research later, but I think that those are the main important things to say.
Just one quick follow-up question on that. So I know you've mentioned that there are the challenges, whether it's the immigrant or the ethnic migrant on the side of being the health professional and on the side of being the community served. Somebody's microphone is on. There we go. Sorry about that, everyone. So what would you say are some good strategies to help mitigate those types of issues in the field, whether it is, you know, some type of cultural sensitivity training towards the potential Anglo-Saxon serving representative, or interacting with your Anglo-Saxon clients because they may perceive you to have not necessarily be here legally or question your level of education? How would you handle those particular issues?
Well, I think that I don't know if you're meaning like when a psychotherapist who is an immigrant is in session with a client questioning their immigration status, or are you meaning more like in general, how to mitigate
Just in
the
general,
situation?
like how would you mitigate those situations in general?
So there are a couple of things that are happening right now. There are research that is happening in which psychotherapists are being interviewed in terms of what are the experiences they're having in the consultation group where with colleagues, because I think some of these experiences are invisible. So for example, if I have an experience with a client who questioned my immigration status, like a white client, I need to be able to have a space to speak about what happened to me, because there might be other clinicians or psychotherapists who are going through the same thing. And then we create awareness in the whole community. Oh, this is happening, you know, and then we can develop more of a consultation with supervisors in terms of how to, you know, process or how to intervene or how to talk to clients about those kind of like questions. But I think that's one of the first things that need to happen, because if we don't talk about what's happening, the therapies will not be like the psychotherapists of color or the immigrant psychotherapists will not be trained in the things that they really need to be trained in terms of how to manage these kind of interactions. So there are a lot of things that are happening right now. We have to do with other questions that you will be asking later that have been being implemented in the community in order to help the psychotherapist who is in this position. For example, there are some consultation groups for minority psychotherapists that are being built. Like, for example, on Wednesday, I will start my first consultation group. I'm going to facilitate the group for Latinx psychotherapists, you know, because I think we really need the space to be able to speak to about our experiences with clients that are very different from a white Anglo therapist.
Thank you very much. hearing examiner Cope, I would also like to get your opinion on this question from not only the legal perspective, but also your perspective as a former immigration attorney.
Certainly. Yeah, so before I start, I just wanted to quickly start by saying that you may hear me refer or use particular terms. And so I just really wanted to kind of state that, immigration, the immigrant community has many faces. And so you may hear me refer to someone who is undocumented or someone who is a non-citizen. I won't say illegal. Human beings are not illegal. But I want to just kind of quickly share, some of the differences. Someone who is undocumented might be someone who is in the United States without lawful status. Maybe they entered the United States with status, and maybe the status has lapsed and they remain in the United States, or maybe without work authorization. Of someone who is a non-citizen might be someone who is documented, or it might be someone with lawful permanent residence or here on a visa. So I just really wanted to, because you may hear me use some of those words throughout the presentation today, I just want to make sure I kind of clarified some of those distinctions. And so, right, as far as the legal profession, certainly we've seen, diversification in the legal profession, but we're definitely a long way from really being representative of our increasingly diverse population, thanks to immigration. And so there is an increasing level of access, I will say, and this is, of course, from kind of my corner of the world, my perspective, where there's increasing level of access to spaces where Latinos and other diverse communities have been traditionally underrepresented. But, I think about, for example, many first-generation attorneys, some second-generation attorneys, meaning the first generation of one's family, to be in the United States, who are navigating the American education system for the first time. And they may already be in a disadvantage, not necessarily because the law school application process is cost prohibitive, which could be a factor, but also because of limited connections and mentorship opportunities that other applicants might be benefiting from right from the get-go. And so, and in kind of thinking about this, I pulled some quick numbers from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, and I wanted to share them with you. So in 2023, of those employed in the legal profession, 52.1% were women, 82.7% were white, 10% were Black or African American, 4.4% were Asian, and 9.7% were Hispanic or Latino. So really a very small percentage of the legal profession is Hispanic or Latino, and just really in general, the non-white attorneys, we're still a long way from being really representative of the communities that we serve. And so I also wanted to include among those percentages statistic from the National Association of Law Placement and specifically disabled community. Of course, I want to acknowledge the various intersections in which we live, disability being one of them. And I think we'll talk a little bit more, of course, among my esteemed panelists and with the later questions about the impact of mental health. On the profession, and in our attorneys and our clients. But just wanted to share that in 2020, law students in class of 2020 self-identified, about 4.5% self-identified as having a disability, but the data is so sporadic to that end. And so just, underreporting and barriers to success were apparent for people with disabilities, people of diverse ethnic backgrounds, the immigrant community. Employers don't always prioritize or accommodate those disabilities or those differences in our lived experiences that make us unique. And so as far as benefits to the profession, the significance of having an advocate with similar lived experience cannot be, as a client, can't be overstated. I saw this repeatedly in my work with the immigrant communities throughout the region. And so not only was it amazing for building a foundation of trust, which is crucial and fundamental to any attorney-client relationship, but that diversity in our lived experience fosters creativity in looking at alternative legal remedies, looking at solutions, as it does in other areas of life. Other benefits, and kind of speaking about this from the immigration attorney kind of perspective, is I'd been fortunate enough to be an immigration attorney through a number of presidential administrations. I've seen expanding interest, I would say, in areas of law like immigration law, And I think, many attorneys, including myself, entered immigration law because we either navigated the process firsthand, or as in my case, I, like many second generation individuals, I'm a second generation daughter of immigrant parents, assisted family members from a young age in navigating these systems, and maybe saw injustices in these systems that we wanted to try and correct or better. And so I think that uptick in interest in the field as well was, could be because of that, but also migration trends and current events also influenced that. For example, I personally saw a rise of interest after DACA was rescinded a few years ago, or in the wake of certain humanitarian crises. People, maybe practicing other areas of law came and said, how can I help? So that's kind of the attorney perspective. And as far as clients in the legal field, obviously immigration has impacted the diversity of the clients we seek. A lot of the migration trends are largely dependent on world events. And so we've witnessed changes in US immigration law and policy because of those trends. And I think that those changes are both a benefit and a challenge. For example, we hear about temporary protected status, which is a humanitarian form of relief whereby individuals can stay and work in the US because it's unsafe for one reason or another to return to their country. DACA was created to allow children who were brought to the US at a young age to live and work without fear of removal. That's great. However, we struggle to create longer term solutions and pathways to permanent residence and citizenship for these populations. And I think that stems from a lack of understanding of some of what is happening in the world and how the impact can span generations. It's not kind of a quick fix, right? Similarly, we've seen a number of initiatives in our local governance, and I'll expand on this a little more later, but aimed at ensuring that immigrant clients that are receiving the same due process as everyone else. But there definitely are still significant issues with language access, access to interpreters, especially for third language speakers. I say third language, meaning speakers that may not be proficient in English or in Spanish, maybe speaking a different language, or access to translated legal materials, a huge thing. And for undocumented individuals, there are fears of fully participating in the legal process because of the fear that immigration enforcement will be waiting for them. And there are organizations and commissions actively working on these issues, but they still remain.
And then just ever so briefly, would you be able to provide us with your perspective on how you think we could potentially start moving in a direction that would mitigate some of these challenges you have addressed?
I think I'll refer back to what, Dr. Fernandez-Castro said. I think they're just, a lot of this just stems from a lack of understanding. I think it's a combination of things. I think the rhetoric around many immigration issues in particular can be dehumanizing, doesn't exactly spurn any desire to make change. I think there's also a lot of misinformation that happens not only in the institutions, in our institutions, but also among the immigrant communities that might be spurned by fear. And so I just think, I wish I knew kind of a one size fits all solution, but I really just think it really starts in an understanding and a basic respect for human beings and human dignity, and just ensuring that regardless of status, regardless of what walk of life you come from, that you are able to access and kind of from the legal perspective, access the same benefits of being in this country as everyone else. And then I think, it's a great place to start.
Well, thank you very much for that. I'm now going to move on to our next question, and I'm going to start with Ms. Mijan. In this question, we want to talk about, like, in what ways have you observed discrimination, whether it's based on your race, your nationality, or immigration status, affect career advancement or the treatment of professionals within your field?
Good morning. Thank you for your question. So I can say that yes, that's still a lot of discrimination in on all the fields that you just mentioned, race, nationality, or immigration status. because most of the top positions in this country belongs to Caucasians. So in order for a Latino to move up or to break that glass ceiling is really hard. We have to work twice to prove that we are capable of doing that work. So it's something that it's so sad that we still have to deal with that. That's the part for the advancement or professional training. And in discrimination, I can say that yes, we still have a long way to go. Specifically, if we talk among our own Hispanics, different cultures we have, for example, Dominicans, Colombians, all that, even you have to hide it or no, there is some kind of animosity sometimes. So, but that I'm going to leave it for the last question. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. But because you've opened an interesting door, I definitely want to go now to Dr. Fernandez Castro to kind of piggyback on that and just kind of get your take on things.
Definitely. When I hear Nancy talk about how it's more difficult for non-Caucasians to, move up the ladder, I feel identified with that description. Also, it makes me think about a research that I conducted 2 years ago as part of my doctoral program. As a result of my own experiences trying to move up, and become a psychotherapist, in which I experienced a lot of barriers. And for example, the example that I brought up about people asking about my immigration, if I was an immigrant, for example, or questioning my educational background. When I brought up that to supervision, it was minimized. So I had to speak with Latinx people or people of color for them to be able to really understand my experience. Because if I talk about that experience with white Caucasian therapists, most of them will say that I was making assumptions about my clients or about the people who will ask these questions. So I decided to then, as part of my doctoral studies, to conduct a research because I wanted to know if there were other immigrants who were going through the same experiences. And the name of the study is called The Subjective Experience of the Immigrant Psychotherapists of Color. So this study, it was a mixed method study in which I had 50 immigrant psychotherapists of color conducting psychotherapy in the United States who answer a survey. And then I interview 8 of them who volunteer for a more long, in-depth interview. So from the 50 participants, like I was able, with the hypothesis that I had, I was able to find that the more they felt excluded in US society, the less included they felt in the psychotherapy community. So somehow there was a transfer experience from the outside society to the psychotherapy community, who usually talks about themselves as this open, progressive group of people, but still their immigrant psychotherapists were feeling not included most of the time. And some of the ways that they might have not felt excluded. So I'm taking all of these from the things that I read and then what the other 8 psychotherapists mentioned in their interviews. So they felt excluded by the lack of attention in the literature and the research about immigrant psychotherapists' experiences, because when you are training to be a psychotherapist, you need to think about your own identity, your own background, as it comes in interplay with the client that you're seeing. So if there is a pregnant psychotherapist, you're going to see a lot of literature talking about how, as a pregnant psychotherapist, you're going to, discuss this issue with your client. There are a lot of things that you discuss with your clients about your own identity, but there was not much about being an immigrant, And so when you go to a training and you don't see yourself being discussed in these trainings, you don't feel part of the community. And even in the literature. Also, one of the most evident exclusions is that most practitioners are white, And within the Latinx group of psychotherapists, when I went through the list, most of them were white passing. There is one author, Bonilla Silva, a Puerto Rican writer, who talks about the groups that are, before they were not considered white, but then they were considered by society as being white, like Irish people or different groups. So the next group, he said, is going to be the white passing Latinx. So there might actually be, even within the Latinx community, some practices that somehow leave aside the person who is not white passing, who is also Latinx. Also, some researchers fail to consider variables of race and immigration in the description of their subjects. They might not talk about how cost prohibit and how there's a lack of attention to the non-friendly white dominated atmospheres that some of these immigrant psychotherapists had to navigate. And also in private practice, as a private practitioner, immigrant psychotherapists of color mentioned not being referred white clients, or white clients consistently not choosing working with them. And this happened to me. And this is why I conducted this study, because I felt this is something, there's something structural about this. Because if white people have wealth and they don't come to you, it's more difficult. There's no integration. It's more difficult to navigate the ladder. So my experience is the people of color, is the immigrant client, the one that support you most of the time and help the community to move up, And also in the accounts of the therapists about their own experiences, the one that I interview with long interviews, they told stories about how they were silenced or threatened with potential ethics, professional, disciplinary actions for talking about race and colonialism in a podcast. If you want to read more about that story, you can go to my dissertation. If you Google my name, you might find the dissertation at icsw.org. But these are some of the things, like there are some structural things or, dynamics in place for certain people not to move up and, to succeed as you in this society.
Thank you very much for that. So both you and Ms. Mijan have kind of talked about like some of the otherings that occur within our community, and this question is open to any of the panelists to answer as a follow-up. We've been talking a lot about the external influences that do cause these challenges to our community, but what about what are your opinions or thoughts about the internal issues that we face as a community when we kind of turn that mirror on ourselves and we, on many occasions, try to other each other, whether it's because I'm more fair-skinned than you are, or I speak a different dialect of Spanish, or you're from a specific location, or, you were quote unquote granted some sort of citizenship that may provide some kind of ideological perception of a community. And, what are your thoughts on that? Any of you is welcome to answer that question.
I just really quickly wanted to thank, before I answered with my thoughts, Dr. Fernandez Castro for bringing up so many important points. I was thinking, I was reminded of just the recent changes to the census forms. So I'm Latina American and Arab American, and we saw something similar happening within the Arab community, where many individuals within the community identify as white, but really others are forced to check the box, right, as white when they don't necessarily identify, right? It doesn't encompass the full breadth of experience that they've had in their lives. And so now it's going to be expanded to include like Middle Eastern, North African, like MENA. And I think that's like a huge thing. But just really quickly, I can kind of provide my 2 cents on the immigration aspect of it, because I have experienced anti-immigrant sentiment from the immigrant community as well. I think sometimes within the community, there's this perspective of entering the country the right way, or, this very similar kind of idea of, oh, well, get in line, when this line is really not a line. And so, it has been interesting. Of course, I also recognize, there's a amount of colorism. I think too sometimes I've experienced individuals from specific countries feeling maybe that they were more of a priority in the immigration system than others. So it was, when I started doing this work, it was a bit jarring, but it also just kind of cemented that again, it's such a diverse community, and but all of that to say, it just, again, like the immigrant community in particular is not a monolith. It's very multifaceted in that way.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mijan or Ms. Dr. Fernandez. Do any of you have any follow-up commentary on that?
Okay. Talking about the particular groups or particular benefits and citizenships and stuff like that, it's so sad to say that even though Puerto Ricans are Hispanics or Spanish or Latinos, we are kind of discriminated or segregated from the rest of the Latinos. You might be like, what? Yes, it's true. Because we, as a territory of the United States, we have citizenship. That doesn't mean that when we migrate to the United States, we come here with $10,000, $25,000. So we need also help and information about services and places we can go when we arrive to this country. And sometimes it's really hard for us to do this.
Well, thank you very much. So now we're going to move on to the next question, and for the sake of time here, we're going to move on to questions 4 and 5. So I would like to start off with question 5, and this is for here in Examiner Co. Would you be able to share any personal experiences or observations regarding how immigration or discrimination has shaped the work environment, opportunities, or client relationships in your field?
I'd love to. There is something, I will say that in the legal field, I've, just as in many fields, I've witnessed a number of microaggressions, being perpetrated against individuals of color, against individuals with certain, immigration statuses. But there was one particular scenario that really stood out to me. And this was someone that I knew, a really amazing, incredible first generation Latina attorney, came to the United States. And within the first few years of coming to the United States, while she was learning English, went through undergrad, law school. I think she's just a brilliant attorney. And she was brought into an organization, a nonprofit organization, and lauded for her contributions. But when she started to later see issues within the organization and push for accountability and brought it to white leadership, I will say, I wasn't in leadership at the time, but I was the highest ranking person of color, which is another thing. PHRC is the first place where I'm not the highest ranking person of color, or and the weight that it lifts off you is it can't be really described. But when she did bring these issues to leadership, she was immediately villainized and told that she was the problem and not a good fit. And this is something that kind of I was thinking about as well. Some of the issues that we encounter, with career advancement. So many individuals are held to professional standards defined by white heterosexual cisgender men, right? And so I feel like very quickly, individuals of color, particularly women of color, in this case, aren't deemed to be a cultural fit, quote unquote, because they deviate from these norms. And so what happened was she was told to be not a quote unquote good fit. I was her direct supervisor at the time, and I saw this happening, and I felt like I was the only person agreeing and advocating alongside her. And that emotional weight is heavy, you know, and I can't imagine. She ended up leaving the organization. And I think what was, you know, interesting to me was that this trajectory is a known phenomenon. I didn't know it at the time, but, you know, as I did kind of research on my own, and of course, I'm sure my co-panelists can speak to this a little more, but it isn't an unusual phenomenon at all, and this happens a lot, you know, with individuals who experience, you know, experiencing this specific kind of discrimination in the work environment.
Well, thank you for that. Now I'd like to turn to Dr. Fernandez and kind of get your, you know, your clinical perspective on this particular issue. Like, can you provide us some insight from your perspective?
Well, I think that it's very difficult for society to move to change somehow and to allow other groups to strive and to be successful without looking at it as a threat. So I think we invest on all these kinds of defenses, psychological defenses, to make the other as a problem, to make the other as a threat, to make the other as the container of all the negative things we think about ourselves. Because if you think about how immigrants and people of color are described, these are projections. We call it in psychotherapy projections of themselves as a group. And I was reading a chapter this week about you know how there's the white people who are in power, who are very wealthy, and then we have the white people who they are workers, like you and I, but for some reason, they feel part of this group of people in connection with the ones who are in power in terms of race identity, and it gives them some kind of like a privilege. It's kind of like a citizen privilege in society. Maybe they might not get all the means and all the money that maybe the white people in power might have, but they get the privilege of being in society, for example, without being afraid that something might happen to you because of the color of your skin or your immigration status. Because we hear some white people saying, well, I have it hard too, I have my difficulties too, but they forget about this privilege that they have, so when I was reading that, I found it interesting because of that same argument I hear all the time. I understand like some groups within the white community might have, difficulties as well. No one is denying that. And I think there's this tendency that when a group of people present with difficulties, like the immigrant population, like they're going through X, Y, or Z, like this other group had to jump and say, we also have it hard too. Like, why do we have to do that? Instead of looking at what they're going through for what it is. And also assuming responsibility on how do you contribute to that. Because that's the other thing. It's very hard for people in power to think about how they're contributing to it, because they're like, I'm just working and living my life. I had nothing to do with what's going on. Or I'm just going, for example, with the person that Tamara was talking at her job. There might be other coworkers who might say, I have nothing to do with it. I don't know, but yeah, like I think that we also have to reflect about how we contribute to these things happening and how can we make it different.
Well, thank you very much. I do want to ask Ms. Mijan as well, her perspective on this question as somebody who works with indigent communities and local on the ground grassroots organizations like CASA and, the assisted living facilities that you currently also serve at in your capacity that predominantly serves Latino migrants and immigrants.
Thank you for your question again. Yes, it's kind of sad that the whole project that I work in is for low-income families, and the waiting list is, oh my God, I don't even know how many numbers. Why? Because the Latinos and the Hispanics are the ones that are put in that oh my God, in that position that they can afford rents of $1,200 a month for 1 bedroom. So they're blue collar workers, which is really hard for them to reach or to pay that amount of rent on that side. And on the other side, going on the same direction, some problems that they don't know that it is illegal to discriminate about with a tenant when it's going to rent. For example, if you are Hispanic, people don't want to to rent an apartment to you because you're gonna be loud, da, 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 because you have kids. But most of our people doesn't know that this is illegal or they are not legal in the country, and they go through a lot of things that they shut up in order not to go to the system because they are scared that the system is gonna get them and they're gonna be deported. So it's my experience with CASA, the organization that I volunteer for. I remember the times that I was the speaker for them. So, and I remember when they told me, no, I don't want to talk Spanish because I don't want the migra to take me and deport me. So it's really sad. That really breaks my heart. So that's why I decided to work for them and to represent them, to represent the ones that doesn't have a voice. That's why I volunteered to be the voice of those.
Thank you very much for that response. Now I'm going to do one final follow-up question, and I would really like to close our phenomenal panel with you guys here. I could ask you a million questions, but I know that your time is precious. So I want to just close this up with this last question, and I would love all three of you to speak on this. I've kind of brought it back to a few times to the internal discrimination within our own community. So how would you say, now turning back to that personal experience or observation question, have you seen the limitations for career growth, for client relationship growth between the Latino community and other segments of our community? Because sometimes we tend to, once again, internally discriminate. And I would love your reflections on that, because I know that we all have perceptions and misconceptions, even of members within our own community. So I think this is a great opportunity to kind of open up such a hush-hush topic within our community to the guests here today. And please, anybody can take the floor. Well, I will volunteer Miss Cope.
I didn't realize I was muted. Apologies. Bueno, en inglés o en español? No, I'm just kidding. I thought you were going to ask one of in Spanish, but yeah, you know, just kind of going back to, I do think, it's hard to kind of narrow it down, right, to like all the potential impacts that it can have. But I do think, this was something like certainly it's always important for us to check our biases, right, as we're navigating this world, and right, to be aware of our biases. And I think it's interesting because when I was working with individuals, of the same community, it's interesting because it kind of can go both ways, right? I think, I've had situations where I've been with like a client, and maybe we're of the same background. A client will assume that I'm going to go the extra mile now because, oh, well, we're both, Ecuadorian, or we're both, Middle Eastern, and I feel like the assumptions will sometimes go both ways. I do think there are just like a number of issues within the community. Like I said, it's just things that I've maybe have witnessed are colorism happening within the community. I've seen, right, I think language or dialects as well, right? I've seen distinctions in whether someone grew up in a rural environment or an urban environment. And I think all these things play into these biases that could ultimately, right, whether explicitly or implicitly, impact someone's ability to navigate the world. I had, when I worked at the one detention center, the individual that was that according to the detained individuals was the harshest. The guard was the only Latino guard in the entire prison. And it's, I can't even begin to dissect kind of what goes into that, but I guess there's this assumption of safety, but that wasn't there, and it's actually the complete opposite. So again, I don't know the answer, but I definitely have witnessed kind of how it manifests and kind of, might have an impact. I don't know if that answered your question, but just kind of wanted to share my experience.
It does, because I think you provide a nice overarching principle based on the misconceptions that we have just because we may be working with somebody who's Latino. As Director Garcia mentioned at Café con Leche on Friday, we tend to gravitate towards our own community. And sometimes we have these expectations that, because we're potentially the same kind of Latino, you're gonna work 10 times harder for me than for somebody who, for example, may be Chilean, just because we're both Ecuadorian. Rather quickly, I want to move on to Ms. Mijan. I know you have slightly mentioned an incident, or it almost felt like you've been hinting at an incident that you would like to kind of bring to the surface based on how I've asked certain follow-up questions throughout the panel. So please, I would love your thoughts.
Okay, so let me finish with the second part of that answer. When I came to, this is a personal experience. It's the first time that I share this in public. When I came to the United States March 2007, I right away heard about the Concilio de Latinos Unidos, and I went there to see if they can guide me to where I can go, where I can find a job, where I can find a living space and stuff like that. And they told me as soon as they called me, they told me, no, we cannot help you because you're Puerto Rican. You guys have papers, so we have nothing to do with you. And I was like, what? Wait, yes, I have papers, I have citizenship, but hello, I did not came to this country with $25,000 or $50,000. So I just need guidance to move around the system, which is new for me because I was just landing from Puerto Rico. That's the first one. Second one, when I show up to my first day of job at the city of Philadelphia, my boss was African American, and his first question was, where is your green card? Oh my goodness, I remember that was like, and I'd sit back and really relax and tell him, sir, I don't need any green card because I'm Puerto Rican. And if you don't know, Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States. Any other questions, sir? And he was like, whoop, muted, totally. But yes, we still are experiencing this kind of discrimination, which is sad, among Hispanics group and among African Americans and Caucasians. Sometimes I feel like I'm lonely, that Puerto Ricans are lonely in this mix of different languages and different nationalities. Because we are one group, but we have differences. So we are here to help everybody to talk as one community, and to volunteer and help each other, not to be shadowing or humiliating or questioning any other person, nationality. Or thank you.
Thank you so much. Doctora Fernandez, I would love to get your opinion. I've listened to your podcast before, and I know you've briefly touched upon some of these topics. So I don't know if there's anything that you would like to elaborate upon that you think would be pivotal to this conversation.
Well, I've been reflecting as I hear you all talk about how minorities treat each other sometimes based on how closer or distant they are to the structure of power. So if you are a citizen, or if you have a visa, or if, for example, as a Cuban or Venezuelan, you're treated differently than the rest of the other immigrant populations or Latinx, that has a consequence for that particular group. But who created that? It wasn't us. That was the US. And then so that creates these divisions of, you have more access, I have less access, you are privileged, I'm not, you have all. And then it creates a lack of understanding in terms of what what does it mean to be a a Puerto Rican U.S. citizen? Oh, that means that when you are in Puerto Rico, you can vote for the president, and that there are a lot of disadvantages that come with it when you live in Puerto Rico. Not everyone knows that. And I understand what Nancy's saying. I've had taken some time to educate about what does it mean to be a citizen as a Puerto Rican, because I think there's a lot of misconception. But at the same time, I hear Latinx immigrants talking very negative about Venezuelans coming to the US. And they occur or use the same white discourse, about how they come here, they don't work, they're just a bunch of criminals that are taking out our jobs. And so, I think we need to reflect about that, and how, we should, like, there is a purpose for all of that, for us to take in all of those white discourse from the people who are in power, and divide ourselves as a Latinx community and as an immigrant community as well. So
I really appreciate that. I once again want to thank our esteemed panelists for being here today. You all have provided such valuable insight from the therapeutic to the local to the legal, and we can't be more grateful for all of the work you're doing in your community. I will say one of the things I would like to do before we wrap up is, just open the floor to maybe one or two questions from the community, if there are any. I mean, I know I haven't seen any in the chat, but if one or two people would like to ask a question, that would be great, just so that we can get some interaction or participation, or maybe just answer some doubts that you may have gotten based on the information conveyed today. I believe, though, I saw Ms. Mijan trying with a raised hand. I'm assuming there's something you wanted to say before that.
Yes, I was thinking that you were going to wrap up, but I just want to thank you for bringing this kind of conversations between our community, because these kind of topics are like, ooh, nobody wants to touch them. It's like the big elephant on the classroom or in the living room. So thank you, Hector. We need more of these forums to discuss and try to work together, make life better and easiest for us in here, because we need to be united, not divided. Thank you.
Well, if there are no questions, then, the panel has concluded, and I wish you all an amazing day.
Thank you so much. And everyone, check out the amazing work that CASA does. It really is life-changing for so many people here in Pennsylvania.
Yes, it is.
Dr. Fernandez, would you be so willing to send us that, your dissertation and the research article you mentioned, so that I could potentially share it with all of the individuals that were here today once the meeting?
You want me to send it on the chat?
That would be wonderful. If you could put it in the chat, that would be fabulous.
Definitely. I'm gonna do it right now. Here it is. Thank
you so much. And once
also,
again,
I was gonna say, you can also listen to my podcast, given you mentioned it. It's a podcast about the diasporic experience of the Puerto Rican community in the U.S. And somehow we are very deeply connected to the Puerto Rican people in the island. So the podcast talks about all of those experiences. So feel free to access it.
And it is in English and Spanish, depending on the topic. So
I can see you are well versed on my podcast.
But once again, thank you everybody for coming today, and feel free to reach out to me if there's any additional questions, or our esteemed panelists who have so graciously provided us with their presence today. Take care, everyone.